Welcome, my name is Mark Turan, and today we're going to talk about using cell references and formulas in an Excel spreadsheet. For most of this video, you should know how to use formulas, be able to copy and paste them, and also how to use autofill. So what do we mean by cell reference? If you want to create a formula that has information that comes from another cell, you can reference it so that the information, if the information changes in the reference cell, the formula is updated with the current information of that cell. In Excel, there are several methods of referencing cells. The default way that Excel employs is relative addressing. The cell you want to reference in your formula will be relative to the cell you are creating in that formula, the formula in. Another way to reference cells is to use absolute addressing. This is how we tell Excel which cell to use and not to change it even if we copy that formula to another cell. And then there's mixed addressing. In this case, we can fix the columns or rows and allow the other to be relative. I'm going to demo the three methods mentioned and also show an example of practical use. Let's get going then. So let's talk about relative addressing. Now we want to reference cells, and what we mean by referencing is we want to be able to select cells in our formulas without actually having to put the number in. So if we choose this cell here to put a formula, and we say we want to add column A, add with column B, we end up with this formula. And really this formula is using referencing those cells to create the formula. So they're not the actual numbers, they're referenced to the cells. And that becomes 3. So it's actually using the numbers in these cells. Now this thing here says it's A1 and B1, and if you were to copy that, you would think you get A1 and B1 as the next as a thing there. But in actual fact, what happens is we get a different set of numbers here. We get B1 and C1. What the heck's going on there? Well, with relative addressing, what it's really saying, even though it says A1 and B1, what it's really saying is I want to add 2 cells to my left with the cell, there's 1 cell to my left, A1 plus B1. So it's just telling you the cells that it's actually going to be referencing for this formula. And if you copy this one here, you'll see that B1, C1 is actually the same formula, really 2 cells to the left, which is B1, and 1 cell to the left, which is C3. And if we were to carry this on out, we see that in relative addressing, it pretty well works out the same way. And this works, of course, doing that way and going down as well. So you can see that it's still referencing the 2 cells beside it. And no matter where you copy this, it'll always be 2 cells. So if I copy this cell in the middle here and paste it, we'll see that there's 0 there because really there's nothing in these 2 cells. And that's relative addressing in Excel. So now let's talk about absolute cell references. Now to create a cell reference that is absolute, in other words, what that really means is you want to be sure that this cell is being used and this cell is being used, A1, B1, not the relative, which is 2 cells to the left or 1 cell to the left. This is absolute addressing. The way we get that is, actually there's a way to do it normally, but I'm going to do it manually for this presentation here. There's a way to do it through automation, but for this presentation I'm going to do it manually just for presentation's sakes, and we are going to add this formula A1 plus or A2 plus B2, and the way I'm going to make this absolute is $$. And I'll do the same thing with the B2, so we always have those 2 things here. So what the $sign does, it tells Excel to actually use those cell numbers and not to be relative. And we can prove this out by just dragging out the autofill, and we see that's all the same answers, and we see that also the formula is actually the same. And again, if we were to copy this formula, copy it and then paste it somewhere in the middle, we see that it's the same formula that goes around. So that's how we make an absolute cell reference. An absolute means there's no other choice. You have to have that cell and no other cells. We're not going to be relative. We're just going to be absolute. And that's absolute referencing. Now we come to mixed references. These are cell references that have both an absolute component and a relative component. And it can either be the column or the row. Let me give you an example of a columnar mixed reference. And let's add a formula here. And let's go with, we are going to do an absolute column reference with a relative row reference. And we'll add it to the B column. Again, we will make it absolutely the B column, and we will change it to there, and there we have the formula. And what it's saying is I'm absolutely A and absolutely B, but you can change the columns for me if you want. So if we drag this out this way, we'll see that no matter where we go, it's the same formula. But if we go down, we'll see that it is actually changing the rows as we go. Now we can, let's get rid of this and let's try something different. Let's do a row absolution. So let's equal that, and we're going to go A3, and nope, we're going to make the row absolute. So we want absolutely everything, and it's always got to be row 3. And we'll do a plus, and we go B absolutely row 3. And now what this is going to do is it's going to always have the same row references, but it will change the column. So going down, of course, it all makes sense because it always goes to the same row, no matter which column we're in. But if we go across, we'll see that it is the different rows that are being picked, although it's the same column. And if we come down here, it's the same thing. It's picking out the same row, row 3, but it's using column D and E, so over here. Now you can actually mix and match these things. We can make it so we can go crazy. Let's go back in here and just see what happens if we go something like this. Might seem a bit complicated, but so now what we have here is we're saying always row 3, but in this point here we're always going to do column B. Doesn't matter what the row is. So if I take this and drag it down, we'll see we get some different formulas. Wherever the $sign isn't, that is where the relative reference comes into play. So here we got there. We notice that the column changed, but not the row. And here the row stayed the same and the column stayed the same because we're going across the same thing there. So that's our mixed referencing. Now let me share with you a practical example of both relative and absolute addressing schemes. This here is a payment schedule worksheet, and you'll see by the addressing scheme that it's pretty straightforward. So if we have a look at the first thing here, E6, it's going to be relative. So that means as we go down, it's going to change based on what is in one column or one row up and 3 columns to the right. So that's a relative one. And we have here relative B7 with an absolute B2, which is the interest rate. And this is just the formula for that. So that is never going to change. That B2 will always be the same. But B7 will be changing depending on which row it's in. And this is an absolute. Absolutely, this will never change. And this here is all relative, so it'll always be the row length. So if we take this whole row and we decide to autofill the rest, actually we should go right from the beginning and we'll go down the line here. We'll see that it fills in automatically and basically tells you what your payments, what is owed to at the end of your payments. So when you make this payment here, you'll have this much left to pay on it, and off it goes down. If we were to change the interest rates up here, which is an absolute value, but it changes everywhere else, makes the payment change, and then we see that the numbers all change to it. So this is one practical view of relative and absolute addressing. I hope this helps. In this video, we covered the reference addressing schemes used in Excel. We looked at relative addressing, then demoed absolute addressing, and finally I explained mixed addressing. I also gave a practical example of absolute and relative addressing and how they can be used in a payment schedule application. I hope this video has been helpful in explaining a few things about Excel, and have a great day.